How's it going, New World? Sethphir here, and we are back finally. I took a little bit of a vacation there. It was a great time, but we are back once again, back into New World, and today I wanted to talk about mutations, my future plans for them, and then one of the mutation rotational promotions and curses and all that that's going on right now. I know it's going to be different for each server as everyone has a sort of different dungeon or different move set to deal with. But on my server this week it happens to be Garden of Genesis, and it is the Void mutation. It's going to be the Eternal series, as well as the Savage promotion, which is something interesting. We tested of this quite a bit on the PTR. We opted to skip this week, actually. We're going to save all of our orbs for the next week when it should be back on the Lazarus rotation, because I believe it cycles through the server for each dungeon constantly. So we hit a bit of a dynasty, then we hit the Garden of Genesis on our server, and we're waiting for it to return once again to Lazarus Instrumentality, where we have the 10s ready to go on there, and we are going to make use of those to get the maximum amount of shards instead of grinding up each individual dungeon out the gate. So that's my group's plan. Your group plan can obviously be different. That's totally fine. Next week we are going to go for full clears on Dynasty and Garden, but we decided to pick one just so we can maximize shard value and orb value going forward into the future. But if you are having to deal with Garden of Genesis and the Eternal series this week, maybe your friends have some orbs, you got some orbs you want to use, we can go ahead and dive into that right now. So the Eternal mutation is something to talk about. It's, in my opinion, one of the harder mutations because it limits your use on the Void Gauntlet and other hard-hitting abilities, as well as has probably some of the toughest mechanics we've seen of any mutation archetype. So the first one is going to be the creeping spell, which is something that goes underlooked quite a lot. But when an enemy dies, there's going to be a spell that grants other enemies in the area void empowerment, which means they're going to get stronger. So killing things staggered is going to punish you, and it's very, very hard in New World to not kill something staggered because of the way that body blocking and the physical impact kind of works with a lot of things. You can do it, but it's a very hard group dynamic to pull off. The next obstacle that you're going to have to deal with is Oblivion, which Oblivion just means that enemies are going to have a life leech on hit, and they're going to deal void damage over time for a dot percentage of the damage that they deal to you, and it's going to heal them, which increases the time of the run. It's particularly nasty. We also have Void Resist, which is going to basically be the reason why we can't use Void Gauntlets. Everything's going to take less void damage. The Abyssal, which will convert all of their damage into the Void type. And finally, Paranoia, which is probably the most annoying mechanic I have seen so far in these dungeons. But basically, whenever you hit a monster with Paranoia, you're going to get one stack. It's going to last a few seconds. And if you reach 4 stacks, you're going to cause a Void Eruption to burst below your location. This can trigger for multiple players. So if you have a couple of melee players and they're piled on top of each other, they're all going to get hit by the same Void stack burst, and probably multiple, and they're probably going to die. So it's particularly very punishing for melee, also punishing for ranged, because you have to constantly monitor those stacks so that you can save your dodge for the right time to deal with that. And then of course there's some abyssal conditioning and whatnot that's going to be just like coming from the dungeon, and items that you can get to kind of help yourself. Obviously void gems will be great coming into this, but that's the baseline for this week that is on my server. You've probably had it last week, you might have it this week, but Eternal is something hard to deal with. That being said, that is going to be for the normal mode difficulty. So if you're venturing into the hard mode or the intermediate mode, you're then going to have to deal with the promotion, which is Savage. The festering wounds did not seem to matter too much. Our tank did notice it quite a little bit when he was getting hit by a lot of big groups of mob, but for the most part of the dungeon, it's not very threatening. It just applies a stacking disease that's going to reduce the amount of healing that you take. And if you have quite a lot of healing coming out from your healer, you can probably just ignore this mechanic entirely. And then the one that everyone hates, the Slicer debuff coming out here. So enemies are going to spawn a little void zone with the Slicer. The best way to deal with this is to kite them ever so slightly away from the Slicer zone. It's obnoxious. It punishes melee really, really hard and makes it very difficult to push monsters into corners or chokes, because if they all pile up on top of each other and there's a ton of slicer going out, you're going to die very, very quickly. That being paired up as well with the paranoia buff, as well as just constant damage coming out, you can see how it could get messy really quick. And then if you do manage to climb up and make it to the hard mode, you're going to get the introduction, and the elite mode as well, of the blowback void, which is a decent mechanic here. It is going to have a global ticking bar, right? And whenever someone from your team uses an ability, that bar is going to fill up, and once it reaches the maximum capacity, it's going to trigger a silence zone beneath the feet of every player, which is going to silence you if you're standing in it. You can't use any abilities, spells whatsoever. And then after a certain amount of time, it will explode doing void damage. And that void damage didn't seem to be too much. You can definitely stand in the explosion. It's not a super big threat, but if you have multiples of them on top of you, it can be very dangerous. But the big drawback is that you just can't do any damage, right? You can't cast any spells. So that's definitely something that you don't want to be standing in for very long. And then the final ability, which will be activated on the elite version, is to be truncated, which means that when the silence zones are activated, all players use natural mana regeneration, right? You're not going to be able to restore mana from your natural tick rate, and if you stand in the silence zone when it detonates, you will get a large amount of mana regeneration, so that's a way for you to get it back. This didn't seem to be too much of an issue for me. I just used pots and other means of getting mana back instantly, whether it not be through mana regeneration but other sources, and the silence zone didn't seem to last too long. It may be a little bit complicated, but for the most part, you could probably just ignore this mechanic. So that's going to be it for the Eternal series. Usually Eternal comes paired with that Censored Curse, which is going to be the Silence and the Blowback Void. We dealt with that on the PTR. It was definitely obnoxious, and since we knew how this was going to go, we said, no, we're skipping this. We're just waiting. We're holding our keys for the next week. If you are a braver soul than I am, feel free to try it. You could definitely do some damage, especially if it's in something like Garden of Genesis, where everything is weak to fire. That's still a strong dungeon for you to go in to perform. But, for my group's personal progress, we decided to save all the keys for next week going forward. So that being said, I wanted to just talk about my mutation goals. So I want to get a 10 clear on every single mutation dungeon in the game and mutation archetype. I'm going to keep doing that until I finally hit that goal. So I'm going to get, we've already done Lazarus, so we're going to focus on Garden and Dynasty after we get our gear up. I'm currently setting at 622 gear score with 4 orbs in my inventory, so I do have quite a few ready to go. My entire group is about the same. We're all 622 with 4 additional orbs, and we're saving them for next week so that we can go ahead and use them on the Lazarus that we already have at a 10, so we can maximize our shard gain. So that's going to be our plan. We're going to get 625 in all categories, so everything here, and then I'm going to start building my perfect set, essentially. So I'm going to be looking for perfect pieces, because some of the pieces I have on aren't necessarily perfect. They're just what the best I had at the time, and that were going to get me increasing my gear score for progress in terms of Mutated Dungeons. So that's going to be my plans for the in-game content for New World and for Mutated Dungeon. I know there are some interesting changes coming up on the PTR, and we will be talking about those pretty soon. Once some more things get settled in stone, I expect a lot of testing and changing phases to go on. I'll be diving into the PTR, of course, to give you updates with those, and I will also be taking a look at some other games here in the near future. I will have some announcements coming out for that. I am going to be checking out Lost Ark, as well as one other game. I forgot what it was called, but I will get to it when I get back to it. The Lost Ark is definitely going to be the one that I want to check out. It's another game that's being published by Amazon. I believe it was by Smilegate. It was a Korean and Russian game for quite a while. So I know a lot of people are going to be very ahead of me in terms of what is the best or what is not. My goals for that game is going to be pretty simple, and I'll talk about that. I'll make a video here shortly. I'm going to be very interested in PvP. I'm probably going to play the Paladin class, and I am going to give PvE a try, but PvP is more where my my baseline is, and that seems like something that will be interesting for me. So that'll be my plans up and coming for the future here. So expect to see a few other game contents coming out from the channel, and we'll have a bigger announcement and talk more about that. But we will also stay on top of all the New World stuff. So whenever something new comes out, we will be covering that, and I will share my opinion on the PTR, all that good stuff. So this is going to be a great place to check out for that. All right, thanks for your time and watching the video, everyone. Appreciate all of your viewership from this point onward and previous. It definitely means a lot. I know a lot of you have been here since the start of the channel, so I just wanted to say thank you, and look forward to seeing all these other interesting and exciting games in the future. Thanks for your time once again, and we will catch you in the next video.